Okay, I wanted to take a minute to create this little video about the research process. When I talked to a lot of you in your conference, I explained this to you when we were talking online, but I didn't explain it to everyone, and it never hurts to reinforce what we talked about. So I wanted to make sure that everybody was clear as to what the process is for researching for the project that you're currently working on for this class. So there's two elements. There's the secondary research and there's the primary research. Right now we're in the secondary research area, and your secondary research is going to be your articles that you find for your annotated bibliography. So if you look at your secondary research, that will be articles. You'll compile those articles into an annotated bibliography, and you'll identify what's called a gap or a niche from that annotated bibliography. And we'll talk more about that later in the semester. But what it is essentially is for most of your questions, you're not going to be able to put them directly into a search engine and come back with good results. So as I told a lot of you, you need to kind of step back and say, okay, so I can't look at romance novels and their effects on preteen relationships. So what can I look at? Okay, maybe I can just look at preteen relationships or just general effects on preteen relationships or whatever your question is. So you have to kind of keep stepping back a couple steps until you hit that area that really has been researched. So from there, you find all of your information, and then your gap or your niche will be when you say, hey, I am looking at the effects of romance novels on preteen relationships. However, there is nothing about that. There is information on preteen relationships in general. There's information on romance novels and how they affect people, but there's nothing about these two things together. That's my gap. That's this little space that I've created for myself that nobody else has talked about before, that is where my research is going to live. So once you finish your annotated bibliography, you should kind of know what that little gap or niche is. So you get your annotated bibliography, you get your gap, and then that becomes your literature review. The literature review is essentially taking what you found in your annotated bibliography and synthesizing it into sort of a discussion of all of the literature, all of the scholarship that you found about the topic, or didn't find about the topic, as the case may be. So that's your secondary research. These three boxes here are your secondary research. Your literature review is kind of the final result of that secondary research. On the other hand, then, your primary research is how you answer the question that you actually came up with. Since you discovered a gap or a niche, nobody else has talked about this before. I have this other research that talks kind of about it, but not really. So now I'm going to answer the question, and you're going to answer it through primary research. You might do surveys, you might do interviews, you might look at novels, you might look at graphics or pictures, whatever it is you need to do that primary research yourself. For most of you, it's probably going to be surveys or interviews. Interviews are good at getting deep information. Surveys are good at getting a lot of information. And if you look at the PowerPoint that I put out there that includes this video, the picture in this video, you'll see what different methods are used for, but we'll talk about that later on. So you do your primary research, you do your surveys, you do your interviews, that results in data, right? You have all this data, then you have to compile it and you have to figure out what the data means. And then that eventually becomes your findings section. So this is the outcome of these two steps. So the outcome of the secondary research was your literature review. The outcome of your primary research is your findings section. What you do is you add then what's called a method section, which just talks about how you found your data. You add it to these other two parts. You put the literature review, you put the method section, you do the findings section, then you write a conclusion, and then all four of these parts together ends up as your finished paper. So when I said at the very beginning of the semester, we're going to write a whole paper, but we're going to write it in steps. This is what I meant. And right now, we're still at this step. We're very early in the process. The reason these two things are next to each other and they're parallel and it's not all in one big long line, other than the fact that I ran out of room, is that you're probably going to have to start your primary research before you're finished with your literature review, just in the interest of time. In an ideal world, you would do all this first and you get your literature review done and you develop your methods, and then you'd move on to your primary research. We don't have that kind of time this semester, so you're going to have to kind of do it in tandem after you do the annotated bibliography. We'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks after you turn in your annotated bibliography. So I just want to make sure that everybody understood where we were going with this and how it all fit together. If you have questions, please, please, please email me and let me know. Otherwise, hopefully this clarifies a little bit of where your project is currently and where it's going. Thank you.